Okay, so I'm going to be doing Spider-Man Miles Morales, the RTX 3080. We're starting off with 1080p on the high preset. Alright, let's jump to the settings real quick. This is the high preset right here. And let's go ahead and scroll down real quick. There we go. Alright, so far we're getting, what, 130 FPS on average? Not too bad, to be honest. Maybe it could be a little bit better, but so far it is doing pretty good. Not sure what we got with the original Spider-Man Remastered, but it seems very similar to what we had before. There's a pretty wide range of FPS right here. We're getting around 120, 130 on the low end, and then 150 to 170 on the high end with this card, it seems like. GPU's not fully maxed out though. We're sitting at 90%, sometimes looking down into the mid 80s, or the low 80s sometimes as well. This game is definitely CPU intensive as well as GPU intensive, so definitely want to get as much frames as possible, I guess. 70% GPU usage, that's the lowest I've seen it hit. Very, very CPU intensive. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and enable ray tracing, see how that does. Yeah, we'll keep it at high just to match the preset. And object range, I'll keep it default, which is 6. Alright, let's see the FPS now. Very, again, very wide range of FPS. We're sitting around 60 FPS on the low end, it seems like, and like 90 FPS on the high end. I think the motion blurs are definitely looking pretty bad. Now I'm gonna go ahead and disable motion blur. Yeah, motion blur strength should not be up to 10. That is so bad. It was becoming very obvious when I was swinging. Alright. It's definitely playable still, but FPS is getting very close to 60. So at 1440p, we definitely want to use DLSS. And 4K, I don't know if that's going to be possible to get 60 FPS with everything maxed out at ray tracing and all that. Not a good place to show a lot of reflections off. Let's see. Look at that, we're falling into the 50s even at times. Oof, pretty bad. I guess the car reflections quite intensive here. Okay, lowest I've seen it hit is around the mid 50s, but on average we're sitting around 65 to 75 FPS. Seems to be where it likes to sit. But yeah, it does fall below 60 occasionally, which is not good for a 3080 at 1080p. Oh my. Okay. I'll try DLSS just to see if it looks any good at 1080p, but normally it doesn't look the best, but we'll try it out anyway. There's definitely a pretty big downgrade in quality. I can definitely see the blurriness, especially in the distance. And there's definitely a weird glow when you pan the camera around Spidey's head. Kind of hard to see, but when you put your eyes around it, you can definitely see it. Alright, let's look at the FPS though. I think, going back to the quality real quick, when you're playing normally, it's not that bad, but when you pay attention to it, it definitely does show its flaws. But just playing normally, it's not that bad still. The biggest issues are the blurriness and the distance, but up close, it does look pretty good. FPS is still falling down to the low 60s though. I just saw it hit 61 FPS just then. So, we're still getting very close to the 60 FPS limit that we got. So now playing the game at 1440p with the high preset, no ray tracing and no DLSS. Let's go drop into the settings real quick. Again, the high preset, same as before, just no ray tracing and no DLSS. Alright, let's continue. We're sitting around 120 to 150 FPS at 1080p high settings, and now we're sitting around 120 pretty much with dips into the low 100s. I want to find my way back into the park. The park was definitely very intensive, so I want to go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, it's a low 100s, it's not that bad still. I gotta say the reflections do look good without ray tracing as well. I can see the reflections of the roads, and they do look pretty decent still. This game definitely feels way more stable compared to the original remaster. That one was crashing all over the place on release day pretty much. Every time we change settings, every time we change resolutions, enable ray tracing, it would just crash. This one is definitely far more stable. Not getting any stuttering, no lag spikes, nothing like that. It's running very smoothly. Alright, enabling ray tracing. Gonna keep the high preset going still. Might disable shadows just to see if that impacts the performance too much, but I'll do it later on. Alright. Okay, getting 90 FPS. This is gonna definitely drop down way lower than what we're seeing right now. Pretty much sitting in the low to mid 60s. Look at that, 50 FPS for a second. That was pretty bad. I definitely felt that lag spike. VRAM is sitting at 8.6 gigs, so we got around 1 gig left. This is the 10 gigabyte variant of the 3080. So we're gonna definitely run into a VRAM limit issue at very high settings, at 4K. That might be an issue for sure. Okay, lowest FPS that I've seen it hit is around 52 FPS. It does drop down into the mid 50s in some areas, but on average it's sitting around the low to mid 60s. Alright, let's go ahead and enable DLSS. Gonna use the quality preset again, so we can compare it to 1080p. Even at 1440p, we're still getting some slight blurriness. It's not as bad as 1080p, it's not as obvious, but we are still getting some blurriness. Alright, let's get going. Swinging around, sitting in the 90s, looking at the park. What do we get? Sitting at 80 FPS. Okay. Not bad. I think we're still dropping down to the 60s occasionally with DLSS at 1080p. So I think it depends on the area that you're playing in, obviously. So right here we're getting 63 FPS. That's the lowest I've seen it hit. Yeah, we do get those occasional FPS dips when we fall down to the mid 50s still, which is pretty unfortunate. Right here we're getting 56 FPS consistently pretty much. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the quality down to balance so we can see what that looks like. And playing with balanced DLSS now. GPU sitting at 60% usage. That's quite bad. GPU sitting at 66% usage. So we are sitting at 60 FPS, but and GPU is just not even being fully utilized right now. 53 FPS. That's pretty bad. But I gotta say, the quality does look pretty good. It is very similar to the quality preset of DLSS at 1440p. So you can get away with playing the game at balanced or quality at 1440p. I'm playing the game at 4K now, still at the high preset, with no RT and no DLSS. Making sure, yep, that looks good. Let's continue.
That's an eyesore. Secure.
Well, I just ruined it.
As long as the octopus-related flaws have been
What are we getting?
Let's hope.
Sitting in the 70s, so we lost around 30 to 40 FPS from 1440p. GPU is always going to be fully maxed out at this point. No way it would be not maxed out.
Hey, Mom. Yeah.
I think we're going to fall down into the 50s right here, even 60s. 62 FPS is the lowest I've seen it hit. It is doing quite well. This game is definitely far more stable compared to Spider-Man Remastered. We had far too many FPS dips in that game, while in this game it does happen occasionally still, where we do fall down into the 50s, but it's just not as common, it seems like. Alright, now with ray tracing enabled, ooh, the stuttering begins. This is so laggy sometimes. VRAM is fully maxed out, sitting at 9.5 gigs. Makes sense why it's starting to stutter here and there now. FPS is sitting in the 40s. But honestly, it doesn't feel that bad. Even using a keyboard and mouse, it does not feel that bad playing at 40 FPS. Alright, I'm gonna go find a busy street like this one over here, and we're gonna see the FPS. Mid 40s is the lowest I've seen it hit. 43 FPS. 42 FPS. Okay, there we go. It's definitely playable, but I would use the controller probably at this point, and I would hide the FPS counter so you can have a. Ooh, I was supposed to say that. Stuttering got pretty bad there. We just had a pretty massive freeze, but for the most part, it's been fine. Okay, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe not. The game is stuttering a bit more now. It's definitely far more stuttery at 4K with RT on compared to 1440p and 1080p. I'm gonna be using the quality presets just to start it off, and then I'll go down to balance and performance. The FPS didn't move by much. We gained like 3 to 5 FPS. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. Now it finally caught up. Okay. Still stuttering quite badly, but FPS is definitely very close to that 60 FPS mark we're looking for. The quality looks fantastic. It looks just as good as native 4K. I want to see if the suit is still glowing, and we definitely do get a little bit of it, but again, it's not too bad. The stuttering is the main issue so far. Even though FPS is pretty much at 60, the game is freezing up every couple of minutes. Realistically, it's every 30 seconds, but you know. Lowest FPS that I've seen it hit is around 49, and on average we're sitting in the high 50s to low 60s. But we still do get some dips into the mid to low 50s as well, so keep that in mind. Alright, with DLSS set to balance, what do we get? 66 FPS. The quality has definitely decreased a little bit with balance, but again, it's not too bad so far. Still getting some dips into the 50s though, just keep that in mind. On foot we're getting around 70 FPS, almost 80, that's quite good. Alright, back down to 1080p, we're going to be playing the game with the max preset this time. And no DLSS and no RT. Very high settings, gonna scroll down real quick. There we go. Now let's continue. So FPS is definitely slightly lower compared to playing the game at high settings. Dropping down as low as 110, I believe.
Let's hope. Okay.
But 102 is the lowest. We're getting very close to the 90s now. Even at 1080p, so 1440p and 4K might be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, but the bodega was out of coconut milk.
Playing the game at 1080p, you're gonna have no issues playing this game. Obviously with a 3080, you can easily run this game at max settings. No problems at all. Turn on RT though, you might have some FPS dips and you might have some stuttering, but we'll see in a second. VRAM is almost maxed out, sitting at 9 gigs. With RT enabled, I'm sure we'll get very close to that limit. Seems like a pretty good spot to enable RT right here. I'm going to go ahead and max that out as well. RT set to very high. Here we go. And, ooh, this is really bad now. Oh, there we go. Bit of a, that was weird. We're getting 60 FPS and then we drop that into the 20s for a second. And now we're back up into the 60s again. Yeah, the stuttering is back for sure. Every couple of seconds the game just freezes for a second and then it continues again. Pretty annoying, I gotta say. This will definitely get annoying over time. Lowest FPS I've seen it hit is around 57, but on average we're sitting around 61 to 62 FPS, which is quite decent, I guess. But you expect a bit more with a 3080 at 1080p to be honest, but it's alright. Now at 1440p, what are we getting? Around 70 to 80 FPS so far, that's pretty bad. Even falling down to the 60s still. So very high settings definitely has some stuttering issues, it seems like. Wasn't like this at high settings, it was quite smooth actually. But very high, we are getting a lot of stuttering with or without RT. Definitely gets more intensive with RT, but without RT it's still happening occasionally. FPS is sitting in the 80s, which is I think a 30 to 40 FPS drop from high settings. I think we're sitting around 100 to 120 FPS. So I guess it could be a 20 FPS drop up to 40 FPS. Yeah, look at that. That was a pretty big stutter right there as well. Personally, I would stick to the high settings, and you'll have a great time at 1440p or 1080p with very little stuttering, or if any at all. If you want to use RT, it's a bit risky, but again at 1440p and 1080p, I think you might be fine. Make sure you enable DLSS though at 1440p. Alright, with RT set to very high, what are we getting? 47 FPS. If you can get a smooth, constant 40 FPS, then this won't be that bad, but the stuttering is going to kill this for sure. We're sitting around the mid 40s to the high 50s, which is quite decent, I guess, with ray tracing enabled. Alright, with DLSS at the quality, what are we getting? Almost 60 FPS. Alright, let's continue though. Not bad. Alright, so on average we're sitting in the mid to high 50s now instead of falling down into the 40s without DLSS. But again, there is still some stuttering going on. So, and finally playing at 4K. No RT, no DLSS obviously. And we're getting 50 FPS it seems like. VRAM is at 8.2 gigs. It's kind of weird. We hit around 9.5 gigs at I think 1440p with RT enabled, and we haven't hit that since. We're sitting at 8 gigs now at this point. Ooh, we just dropped that into the 40s for a second. So on average we're sitting around 54 FPS with some dips into the high 40s. The game is still stuttering just as much at 1440p with RT on, so not much of a difference there. FPS is definitely in the playable range, but the stuttering again ruins it. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and enable DLSS. This time I'm going to start it off with balanced and then move on to performance. As you can see, the game does look pretty good. FPS is sitting in the 70s now, which is very nice. We gained around 20 FPS. But man, the stuttering is getting really annoying at this point. It's happening so often that it's not worth playing at very high settings at 4K. We do still get some dips into the 60s, unfortunately, but on average we're sitting around the mid 70s to low 80s, so quite good. Now looking at the quality at performance mode, this does look pretty great, I gotta say. It's looking really nice in performance mode. Surprisingly, looks very similar to 4K native. FPS is going to be sitting in the mid 80s up to 90s, which is pretty fantastic. Again, we gained a pretty decent FPS jump over the balance preset. But we are getting pretty close to that 60 FPS mark again, almost at 72 FPS. Now let's see how it looks with Ultra Performance DLSS. I'm sure it won't look the best, but let's try it out anyway. And here it is. Do we get any shimmering at all? It's honestly looking pretty fantastic. This looks really nice. Most games, when you use Ultra Performance, it falls apart. But in this game, it is looking very close to native 4K. Honestly can't tell. FPS is sitting in the 90s now, almost at 100 FPS. I think it peaked at 100 FPS, but on average we're sitting in the mid to high 80s, pushing up into the 90s. Alright, with RT set to very high, let's go ahead and see how this runs. No DLSS. Okay, it's very bouncy. It goes from 10 FPS to 20 to 30 and falls down. Oof, this is pretty bad. Seems like 20 FPS is going to be the average that we get. Pretty massive FPS drop. Oh my god, this looks pretty fantastic though. I gotta say, this looks amazing, but FPS is not so amazing. Sitting in the 20s. I do want to know how much FPS do we gain back by just disabling Shadow RT, because I think most people don't really care about that. Right, disabling Shadow RT, what do we get? Alright, 36 FPS, 46 FPS. Nope, back down to the 20s. Still sitting in the 20s, but a couple FPS higher than what we had before. Okay. This game looks gorgeous at 4K though. I gotta say, this looks amazing at 4K. Alright, with balanced DLSS, what do we get? Let's wait for the game to catch up. Okay, any second now. Nope, this is it. We're getting worse performance than before. There we go. It finally caught up. 40 FPS. Pretty great, I gotta say. Almost 60 FPS, really. So I'm guessing the stuttering will get patched out. This is on release day, so I've done a pretty decent job with how stable the game is so far. Hasn't crashed at all for me, whereas before it crashed within like the first 20 minutes. But yeah, sitting in the low to mid 50s, dropping down into the 40s occasionally, and sometimes hitting the 60s, which is pretty nice. Gonna go ahead and push it up to performance mode now. And with performance DLSS, what do we get? 60 FPS hopefully. So close. Oh, there we go. 60 FPS it seems like, with some dips into the 50s of course. Can't be a consistent 60. Minus all the stuttering, it is a pretty decent experience. Alright, that's it for the video guys. If you made it this far, appreciate you. As always, if you like what you see, then like and sub the channel. See you next time.